In 2021, the Denver Broncos finished 7-10, and at one point they were 7-6, and it looked like they had a shot at making the playoffs. Now, this team was pretty talented as they had two-star defensive players in safety Justin Simmons and defensive rookie of the year candidate cornerback Patrick Surtain. Now, the one missing piece for this team before they could become a playoff contender and heck, maybe even a Super Bowl contender was the quarterback spot, as most games in 2021 were started by Teddy Bridgewater, who they brought on in the offseason, and as you can see, 3,000 passing yards, 18 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. While those stats aren't bad, that's not going to win you a Super Bowl. And this is going to be one of the rare times you hear me talk bad about Drew Lock, and I don't even think I'm going to talk bad about him too much. And Drew Lock was the other quarterback who started some games this season, and while in 2019 in his rookie year, he wasn't bad, by 2021 the Broncos had completely given up on him, and by the stats you can tell he wasn't that great. So like I said, the Broncos were one quarterback away from possibly making the playoffs and possibly making the Super Bowl. Meanwhile in Seattle, tension was brewing between quarterback Russell Wilson and his team, the Seattle Seahawks, as he was frustrated that the team wasn't doing better in the playoffs as he wanted to be in the Super Bowl. And after a lackluster 2021 season where he was injured most of it and the Seahawks finished 7-10, he knew it was time to leave Seattle and he requested a trade, and the stars aligned perfectly for the Broncos. And on March 16th, 2022, the first day of free agency, the Seattle Seahawks traded quarterback Russell Wilson to the Denver Broncos, and the Denver Broncos gave up a few players and a ton of draft picks, and the Broncos look like they could possibly win the Super Bowl now that they have a stacked defense and a superstar quarterback. Despite high hopes and high expectations, the Broncos would completely fail. In Russell Wilson's first game as a Bronco, the schedule makers knew what they were doing. In his first game, he'd be traveling back up to Seattle on Monday Night Football. With the Denver Broncos projected to be a playoff team and the Seattle Seahawks looking to rebuild and possibly get the number 1 overall pick, it was expected that the Denver Broncos would blow out the Seahawks, but that was just not the case. With 7.5 remaining in the third quarter, the Broncos are sitting at 4th and goal, down by 4, and they're at the 1-yard line, and they give it to Melvin Gordon, and they do 1-yard line, and you can't score. But on the very next Seahawks drive, Geno Smith threw an interception, and then a PI later, the Broncos were down to the 1-yard line. They couldn't convert on their next 2 plays, but on 3rd and goal, they gave the ball to Javonte Williams. And then this happened. Coach Nathaniel Hackett wasted the time until 20 seconds left, and he decided to go for a 64-yard field goal, which would tie for the second longest in NFL history. The math behind this is really dumb, and it would take the best of kickers to hit a field goal in this situation. So, what happened with the season to the Seahawks 17-16, and when this happened, a lot of people consider it an upset. A lot of people consider it a one-game wonder. However, this would be a foreshadowing for both team seasons. That next week, the Broncos would win. However, it was not pretty, as the Broncos would barely scrape out a victory against the rebuilding Texans 16-9, and the offense continued to struggle. That next week, they'd beat the 49ers 11-10 on Sunday Night Football, and while they won, the offense continued to struggle. Look at that. They scored 11 points, and 2 of that came off of Jimmy Garoppolo stepping in the back of the end zone for a safety. So, if he didn't do that, they wouldn't have won. And somehow, this was the peak of the Broncos season. We hop forward 2 weeks to week 5, where we genuinely had one of the worst football games played in the modern era of football, as on Thursday Night Football, the Colts and Broncos went into overtime tied 9-9, and the Colts scored a field goal, and the Broncos were driving. Now, before we get into what happens, this game was so bad that despite it being tied and going into overtime, you had fans leaving the stadium right before. Now anyway, back to what's going on. 4th and 1, final play of the game. They're inside the 10-yard line, creeping in on the 5-yard line, but they have to get at least a first down here or a touchdown. So, well, let's just see what happens.
4th and 1. Surveys, good protection, slides, fires, broken up in the end zone.
A perfect ending to an historic day, and the Broncos would lose 12-9 in one of the worst games of all time. And this game would even inspire Brandon Prentice the new worst game of all time series, if you know what I'm talking about. I myself could go on and on about how bad this game was, but that would make for a really long video. To make matters worse, on the last play of the game, Russell Wilson had Melvin Gordon wide open, and if he threw it to him, he would have scored a touchdown. However, like you saw, he did not throw it to him, and of course, the Broncos lost. And before this point, the ride was already getting shaky, but after this game, the ride was about to go head-on with an 18-wheeler. But there is still hope for this Russell Wilson-led team. For their new head coach, the Broncos would hire Sean Payton out of retirement, and since he was still under contract with the Saints, they would have to trade a third-round pick to him, but that's no big deal. Sean Payton is a legend, and he was the head coach to Drew Brees in New Orleans. With now a legendary head coach on the team, there were expectations that they could improve and finally make the playoffs. I mean, even look at this, they look like they love each other. However, some fans are still traumatized by the expectations that were set with Russell Wilson and Nathaniel Hackett, so they were expecting, or they were fearing, something similar to happen. And through the first 5 games of the season, that was the case. Yeah, it wasn't good. In the first 6 games of the season, they were even worse than last season, going 1-5, and it looked like the ride was just, I don't even know anymore. This 1-5 start included an historic 50-point loss in week 3 when they lost to the Dolphins 70-20. The Russell Wilson era was looking like a failure, and it was looking like it was about time to move on. But after their week 6 game against the Chiefs, everything changed. Over the next 7 games, the Broncos went 6-1, including beating the Chiefs for the first time since 2015, and they were sitting at 7-6, and they looked like they could possibly make the playoffs. Heck, with the way the Chiefs were struggling late in the year, they had a chance to win the AFC West. In Week 15, on a Saturday Night Football game, the Broncos had a game against the Lions, which had some huge playoff implications. If they lost this game, it'd make it a lot harder to make the playoffs. However, the Broncos would get abolished 42-17, but there's no need to worry. Their next 3 games were against a tanking Patriots team, a Chargers team without Justin Herbert, and a Raiders team led by Aiden O'Connell. However, on Sunday Night Football, on Christmas Eve, the Broncos were embarrassed by the Patriots, who were one of the worst teams in the NFL, as Chad Ryland, of all people, hit a game-winning field goal to send the Patriots home with a W. You look at Russell Wilson's stats for the game: 238, 2 touchdowns, no picks. Isn't a bad game, but you look at the QBR, and 54 QBR is not good. And if you watch this game, he was one of the reasons why they lost. And this would be his final game starting and playing as a Denver Bronco. After that Patriots game, he was benched, and he was informed that he'd be released in the offseason, and officially on Monday, they officially announced he was going to be released at the start of free agency. And while Russell Wilson improved in 2023, and he wasn't all that bad, and I also believe if you gave him one more year, I think the Broncos would have made the playoffs, but the Broncos decided that the Russell Wilson era was over, and by releasing him, they officially made that Russell Wilson trade they made back in 2022 the worst in NFL history. For the Broncos' new quarterback, it's looking likely it's going to be Michigan quarterback J.J. McCarthy, as he's rising up draft boards, and J.J. McCarthy would be a perfect fit for Sean Payton. And for Russell Wilson, we're not entirely sure yet. The Falcons and the Steelers are a possibility, but we're still not quite sure. And well, that's the end of the video. That's it. Goodbye.